you wonder when he's writing this if he actually is so deluded that he's looking around and saying like, good thing our courts aren't fascist, or if he just knows like what his job is which is to pretend that the real constraining factor on a fascist administration is the Constitution or the Supreme Court.
Well, this is an age-old hobby horse of liberals, is to watch radical grassroots militant organizing achieve something and then give all of the credit for those successes to liberal institutionalism.
Yeah.
Right. You have an 8-hour workday and a 5-hour work week. Why? Not because unions illegally struck were attacked and killed by Pinkertons with the support of liberals. It's because the liberals passed the New Deal, right?
You tear down the house, then you put up the rent. You pocket the cash, and you crush all dissent.
Hi, and welcome to the Red Diaper Pail. This is a podcast about art, history, culture, politics, technology, and parenting from a left perspective. My name is Simone.
And I'm John Paul.
It is Friday the 13th, February Friday the 13th.
Dun, dun, dun.
And this is episode 23.
Our most cursed episode.
It's our most cursed episode. This is our second episode of the week. This is our first week trying to release the headlines separately from the artifact and releasing 2 episodes a week.
Mm-hmm.
And we've almost released it as of Friday.
Yeah, I think I'm going to try for Monday, Thursday going forward, but we did Tuesday, Friday, which is probably not ideal. But anyway, I think we have a good one in store for us.
I'm very excited about this episode as well. It is about fascism.
Our favorite topic.
And John Paul is bringing us the artifact this week.
I am. Okay. We're going to do our favorite, which is a bad op-ed. This time in the Atlantic. But
they're not, I think if they're in the Atlantic, they're not op-eds. They're pieces.
They're just think pieces. Okay.
Insights. Intellectual contributions.
Yes. Well, supposedly. So this is Jonathan Rauch.
Sure.
I don't know who this is. I guess he's a guy at the Brookings Institute.
He is a lifelong policy pundit.
I don't know what his political takes are. The Brookings Institute is radically centrist, I think.
Yeah, they're I was reading about them. They pride themselves on having critiques, equal critiques of them being left or right leaning. Yeah. This guy is a very big proponent of gay marriage was a big deal for him.
Okay. So he's a lib.
He's like a liberal. He's not, I wouldn't even call him a progressive. I think he's very centrist.
All right. Well, his article is entitled, "Yes, It's Fascism." So the Atlantic has decided that they're going to weigh in on this.
Yep. Thank God.
Until recently, I thought it a term best avoided, but now the resemblances are too many and too strong to deny.
Oh, that's really brave.
He should have just asked us. So yes,
he probably was avoiding it because people like us are obnoxious using it.
That's literally what he says. So I guess we're on record saying that this is fascism and it's going towards fascism necessarily. I think we'll go a step further than him and say that it's not Trump, but the system is moving towards fascism because it doesn't really have a choice. That's been my position.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to talk about what is fascism, because I think it is a little bit confused. And I do think it gets thrown around a little bit too much.
Sure.
And also I think people are irritated to have been living through centuries of what you might call fascistic treatment, with commentators saying, well, that's not fascism when it's done to you, but now that it's being done to me, it is. I think that's an interesting critique, and I have some things to say about that too. But I also think it's notable that the Atlantic pushed this all over social media. So there's a reaction, there's a turn here happening with Alex Preddy where people are being a little bit more bold in their declarations of this scary state of our democracy, if you can call it that. So I don't know. This is an interesting piece. So anyway, when you say this is fascist, what you don't mean is that it's right wing. And I think a lot of people called Bush Jr. a fascist and have lists of the things that he was doing that was fascistic.
Mm-hmm.
I think in retrospect, what we might say is that was at most a pre-fascist thing, but really that was one version of neoliberalism, not fascism like we're having fascism today.
What do I mean? Well, I feel very silly about banding it around during Bush too, because I do think that what was happening was liberals and progressives were just identifying like right-wing leadership characteristics and right-wing politics in America and calling it fascist. And I think that was very misleading. I believe that fascism historically has looked different under different fascistic leaders. And I also believe that I have an analysis of fascism that it arises as a necessity of capitalism failing, like capitalism beginning to fall apart and other ways of governing people and economies no longer being capable of holding it together. So you end up with fascism, and fascism is like a consolidation of political and economic power in order to control markets and people.
Yeah.
So my analysis here is like, you don't call conservative or even like rights, even when conservatives take certain rights away, you don't call that fascism. Or if they're invading Iraq, you don't call that fascism if that's like just the machinations of like neoliberalism or even neoconservative, like business as usual. But what Trump is dealing with, and I think honestly what Biden was dealing with before him, and what probably Gavin Newsom would be dealing with after Trump, is a dying empire that has a market problem, and that requires a type of political authoritarianism.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing. And that's why it feels, I think, so rapid, is the material conditions support this.
Yes. I completely agree with you. I think the common conception of fascism is that it's a political affectation by certain people who have like a disposition towards that, based upon a base of people who sort of lose their minds, and then they create a fascist economy because of their sort of fascist political ideology.
Yep.
And that you can tell by a list of characteristics which are, if not unique to fascism, like all taken as in total, add up to fascism.
Right.
The reverse is actually true, is that a lot of these things are present. A lot of the things that people object to are present throughout capitalism, which is why we're not anti-fascist, we're anti-capitalist.
Right.
So when people complain about, like, for example, the treatment of Iraqis during the Iraq War, that was the way that they were treated is characteristic of fascistic governments, but importantly aimed at subalterns, not aimed at the imperial core.
Or the propaganda used in the build-up to the Iraq War that included like capture of mainstream media as well as like capture of international institutions.
Yeah,
people
disciplining of civic society.
That's fascistic, but it's actually just capitalists.
Yeah, and if you look at in the history of the United States, you have slavery and Jim Crow, and these things were horrific and necessary for the accumulation of capital that led us to the neoliberal era, but were not fascism, because fascism is a particular thing that happens not when capitalism in its ascendancy is doing all the horrible things that capitalism always does, but it's a particular form of horrible things that happens once capitalism reaches a late stage, once the economy is in turmoil, and once like a strategic retreat is necessary.
So I think that you look at the history of the United States, and there's probably periods where it was flirting with a true fascism, because like obviously capitalism for the U.S. has been ascendant for the last century. Capitalism in Europe was ascendant during periods, and also Europe saw fascism because the economic processes that were happening within certain countries necessitated a fascist response.
Right.
I think that probably if you look around the Civil War period, so I think there were certain periods in the United States where fascism was a possible result. It wasn't just a foregone conclusion that it was going to go capitalism until 2025. But I think I agree with what you're saying, is that like these sort of like characteristics that people say, oh, that's fascist, that's fascist, that's fascist, and therefore if you have enough characteristics, it's fascist.
Yeah.
Is not how I think of fascism. I do think there's a couple of characteristics of fascism that I think are consistent. And it's like the risk or collapse or threat against the ruling class and having an actual economic crisis they can't manage.
Mm-hmm.
And something about male laborers. I think there's something there about like the erosion of the power of male laborers and like the anxiety of that and the capturing of that anxiety to usher in the ideological stuff that comes along with fascism.
Yeah.
It's underformed. I think those two things I think those two things are required in the recipe.
Yeah. I would say that the angst that working men feel maybe is not as widespread before as it is now, but is always present.
Sure.
Additionally, right-wing blowhards who want fascism and get off on political cruelty have also always existed. And the degree to which that was tolerated in the mainstream press or civic institutions determines the degree to which it feeling like it's a thing or not.
Yeah.
Like if you believe all these things and you're the same numbers, but you're so marginalized that no one ever hears from you,
Sure.
no one really cares that you exist. And that's to a large degree what is true. If you think about a lot of the MAGA base or people who have never voted in elections before, they were susceptible to this stuff if it was presented to them, but they've never really had an opportunity to engage with it before because it wasn't something the system needed to move towards.
Right.
So there was not an activated thing. So I agree with you about the men thing. They tend to be the disaffected man who's worried that he's no longer the Führer in his own home or something like that, becomes the foot soldier of fascism. But those people are there. They just have to be scooped up and activated by like an active fascist project.
But I think that if you fail to activate them, even if you have the material conditions that we might suggest should lead to fascism, you will not have fascism.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It has to be done by people.
Right.
It doesn't happen automatically. It has to be done by people. And a lot of times it has to be done by parts of the working class, not principally large chunks of the ruling class, and notably large swaths of like the petty bourgeois middle classes. In Nazi Germany, this was like school professors and shopkeepers.
Yeah, but you also need what we've seen is a white male citizen working class contingent or faction is required to usher this in.
They are the midwives of fascism, you might say.
Oh, that's the other thing I was going to say. Let's do some callbacks to other episodes. So the collapse of the West, the collapse of liberalism, the collapse of neoliberalism, all of these are, and we've talked about this in different episodes, fascism is the response to that. The neoliberalism's failure to keep this together. Neoliberalism can no longer administer capitalism the way it was. Mm-hmm. And so it's collapsing. That's where you get the collapse of the rules-based orders. This is where you get Carney being anxious. This is where you get the collapse of the West. All of these, this is that rupture moment.
Right.
And that's why we're talking about this being fascism. This is not like, this is a economic result on a global scale. This is not just like Trump being like very into being a daddy.
Yeah. And that happens. It's an economic process underneath it, but it also like a lot of the politics are direct manifestations of the economic weakness. Like in normal times when capitalism is in its ascendancy, everyone's making money, everything is good. And so there's incentives to keeping up appearances and making nice with the order as it exists, right? So you may have like ideological gripes about quote unquote globalism, but you're going to understand that your bottom line is dependent upon you getting along and going along with the prevailing system. And that's going to preclude things like a genocide in Gaza. Like we're not going to be able to do a mass genocide in Gaza. We have to do this like slow burn thing. And we have to like pretend it's about like liberal values or whatever, because there's too much money on the table to like become a pariah state. But once that system starts to break down and the incentives are not there, the incentives of like plunder, of open authoritarianism and plunder become more attractive than sticking with the script. And that's why you got all of this peeling off. Is like, it's just the system cannot rein this stuff in. And it would prefer to. Liberal democracy is a much more stable superstructure for capitalist economics.
Yeah.
And that's what they're looking at is like a very unstable future with a very unstable political system, but that one that they must retreat to keep everything in order.
And liberals and dictators, they are not in conflict with each other. They actually could exist together and have existed together for a long time. We're just at a period where it's like a tipping point towards the liberal not being able to hold it alone. But like the argument here isn't like, oh, if only the liberals and neoliberals could like manage it better, right? Because it's a dialectic, if you will.
Yeah, actually, speaking of that, my favorite definition for fascism, because it's dialectic, is the understanding that deception plus force equals liberal democracy. Understanding that force, meaning violence against people, both internationally and at home, is a necessary component, but the primary driver of liberal democracy is deception. People believing they live in a democracy, people believing that like their work arrangements, while oppressive, are actually fair and market-based and therefore unavoidable, and that fascism moves towards force plus deception equals fascism, which is force becomes more and more and more the dominant way of organizing and maintaining society, with deception being more and more of a secondary component of that, which is why you have this experience of talking to fascists and it seems like they make no sense, and they will tell you a bunch of words that don't add up to a coherent ideology, and they just seem to be getting off on the violence. That's because the violence is more important than it making sense.
It's not I think it's not a particularly coherent ideology, because the ideology is not as important as like what fascism allows for the elite to do.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that the deception plus force is like the Minnesota National Guard, and the force plus deception is like Bovino and his crew.
Bingo.
So
exactly right.
Which is why it was like, oh, if they're all going to work together, aren't we just getting a bigger crew of fascists? But anyways, so now that we've done the entire fascism,
now we've explained to you what fascism is. Let's hear what Rauch. Yeah, let's see what Rauch has to say about it. Okay, I'm not going to read this whole article, but I'm going to take some excerpts here. Okay, here he is. Until recently, I resisted using the F word, fucker, to describe President Trump. For one thing, there were too many elements of classical fascism that didn't seem to fit. For another, the term has been overused to the point of meaninglessness, especially by left-leaning types who call you a fascist if you oppose abortion or affirmative action.
Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever said I'm against affirmative action? Well, I guess you wouldn't say it.
I say that. What people are identifying, and ironically, he does the same thing in this article, is that you have a fascist mindset, or you're being fascistic on this issue, does not mean that the whole system is fascism. Right. And yes, the state controlling women's bodies is fascistic, which is why abortion is legal in liberal society and becomes increasingly illegal in fascistic society.
And yes, you're exactly right. This article goes on to then list characteristics of fascism to make the argument that we're in fascism, rather than providing an analysis or a structural definition, which Jean Paul and Simone just gave you.
For yet another, the term is hazily defined, even by its adherents. Mm-hmm. That's for sure. From the beginning, fascism has been an incoherent doctrine, and even today's scholars can't agree on its definition. Yeah. Mostly because they probably very rarely are doing a materialist analysis.
I mean, he's clearly never read the Marxist scholars who can absolutely agree on its definition. But
Italy's original version differed from Germany's, which differed from Spain's, which differed from Japan's.
Mm-hmm. Japan was fascistic?
Yeah, they consider the imperial Japan during World War II to be a type of fascism. And I think that's probably fair to say.
It wasn't just fascism by
association? No, I think I don't know as much about Japan as I do about Germany, but I think that's probably fair. They were facing a crisis because they had no access to oil whatsoever, so they couldn't continue to grow their economy. All right. Blah, blah, blah. The best description seemed to be a psychological one propounded by John Bolton, Trump's first-term national security advisor. Quote, he listens to Putin, he listens to Xi. He listens to how they talk about governing unburdened by the uncooperative legislatures, unconcerned with what the judiciary may do, and he thinks to himself, why can't I do that? This doesn't amount to being fascist in my view, or having a theory of how you want to govern. It's just, why can't I have the same fun they have?
I mean, that's definitely true about Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that Bolton very astutely observed and explained the Trumpian sort of way of dealing with leadership.
Yeah, his personal affectation towards like having sort of more control. And I think we talked a lot about he sees the world as nations with leaders, and the leader is the subject of the nation, and the nation is sort of an appendage to the leader.
Yeah.
Right. So he looks around the world and he says, I'm not having a conversation with Russia, Russian civil society, Russian ruling class. I'm talking to Putin, who represents Russia. So he likes going to Davos, for instance, because he thinks he's talking to all of the principal people in the world, with everyone else being like a serf or like a opera chick of that leader.
Right. And I think his whole shtick with deal making is like that you don't have to all of this like bullshit around diplomacy or moderation or, you know, the niceties of state negotiations, all of that is bullshit that gets in your way. And that a big man has a conversation with another big man, and sometimes they have to, you know, figure out how big their sticks are.
Yeah.
And then that's how shit gets done. And it is a psychology of Trump. And I'm sure it's a psychology that is present with other authoritarian leaders, but it does not give you information about fascism.
Yeah. What I will say is that his affectation towards that is compounded by the fact that liberal societies necessarily distribute power and decision-making across large groups of people. This is, you know, the much touted checks and balances in the U.S. Constitution is an example of this, is that the governing of the ruling class through the state is necessarily like diffused. And that's to their benefit because they want to be able to make consensus making. They don't want any particular portion running off with power and leaving the rest of them behind. And, you know, our system allows for like press and civic society and all these things to have a say, right? And that usually runs fairly well because there's usually something approaching a consensus or a process for building consensus amongst the ruling class in liberal democracy. What you have, though, in fascism is you have less money to go around, and you have a heightened rivalry between sections of the ruling class. This is no exception to that. We have, like, Wall Street is the neoliberal ideology that has governed Wall Street and finance capital is on the outs, and this more domestic capital or maybe adding on with the Silicon Valley people is ascendant, and there's real conflicts there that are very hard to resolve in a system which is sluggish and requires more consensus making. So the drive to do the things he needs to do to govern this in a way that punishes his rivals and makes his benefactors happy is undermined instead of facilitated by like the messy diffused power. Sure. So there's the authoritarian like disposition has material behind it, right? Like I need to find a way to bypass these institutions because my rivals are using them to retard progress towards my political vision in a way that doesn't exist in like normal liberal times.
Yeah, there's definitely like a symbiosis of the psychology and the material conditions, and the fact that he is that kind of guy does not in fact make it fascism.
Right. And you can see like in the first term, his disposition didn't matter as much because...
Well, he also surrounded himself with more of the old school. I mean, he surrounded himself with quite a circus, but there were some technocrats and there were some, you know, holdovers from former ways of doing things. And I think overall the dispositions of the people were a little bit more diverse versus this time. I think you entirely have dispositions of people who are, I don't know how to say it, dickheads.
Grotesques, dickheads, and losers.
Yeah, egomaniacal pricks who believe they are the Ubermensch. I don't know.
But I would think the question is whether that was an accident of history or whether that was the system requiring him to play much more nice with the existing power structure.
I don't think.
And then now we're reach a point where there's a much more tolerance for like the reshaping of society project, which is what like Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller have wanted since they were part of the Trump 1.
I think they just kind of fucked up Trump 1. I think Trump 2, there was a much clear mandate from within the Trumpian world that they were going to take seriously their project. And then in order to take seriously their project, and I do think it's a fascistic project. I think it's a white Christian nationalist, isolationist, fascistic project. I think there was enough energy to say in order to do this is the type of administration we have to staff. And these are the types of rules we're gonna follow internally. Like we're not gonna fire people as much, and we're gonna, you know, it's less. They're underrunning themselves less internally than they did. I don't know if that was Bannon and Miller and others like calculating that this could be tolerated now and wasn't tolerated then. I just figure they're revising their strategy based on what they were able to.
Yeah, I mean, remember Bannon didn't have a strategy in Trump 1. He was pushed out by the I don't know what you call them, the technocratic wing or the more like get along.
They failed to do their project in Trump 1.
Yeah, and I think it's because the structure
was self-protective still.
Was not as willing to go along with it as it is this time.
And you can thank Biden for that. I mean, you can thank the you can thank the liberals who have who are taking care of it the last 4 years for the continued decline of the structure being able to exist.
Yeah.
I mean, there's material reasons, but also the liberals' inability to serve any interest or govern effectively. I mean, you could say that's a result of where they're at and oh gosh, their hands are tied. They can't do any better. But they're entirely part of this progression.
But yeah, I mean, the question with Trump one was, what is the tolerance for this? How well is it going to be able to manifest itself in these conditions, with this population, with these economic constraints, right? You cannot have fascism if everyone is overwhelmingly against it, right?
Right.
Or you have a version of it which is so unstable that it doesn't really work, right? So the question was, is there tolerance for this? Can we pull it off? There was a backlash, partially because of incompetence, partially because of COVID, and partially because people were disgusted by it in practice, and that swung back to Biden. And then the question became, does neoliberalism actually have anything to offer in these circumstances? Can it provide the solutions that it needs? And I don't think, I don't agree with people who say Biden politically failed, and therefore we end up with Trump. That if he had just done this, this, and this, he could have avoided this. I think that they did the best that they could to reposition neoliberalism as the governing ideology. The problem is that neoliberalism itself is now unable to deal with all of these problems, including the genocide in Gaza.
Right.
But in general, just could not summon any of the oomph it needed to do anything.
I agree with you. I certainly think that the absolute inhumane, monstrous handling of the genocide in Gaza by all the elected officials is an accelerant to the fascism we're seeing today.
Absolutely, yeah.
I also agree that neoliberals were not going to stop. We're not going to manage the capitalist crisis. And in some ways, this is inevitable. But I refuse to let the people off the hook who could have at least handled it less monstrously. So there's an inevitability to this that I'm not comfortable with. Because we got our little teleological line, capitalism, fascism.
Yeah.
There's no way Biden politics himself away from this eventuality. However, we got the worst version of what liberals and supposed progressives in elected office could be doing in the face of the greatest horrors they could have seen.
Yeah.
And because of that, it at least emboldened the incoming fascist administration to be I think we can get away with anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Oh, and on the way out, the Biden administration and these Democrats in office were let's do everything we can to police and harass and shit talk activists. Let's make those people the least safe as possible, which is not what you want to do right when you hand the fucking keys over to the fascists.
Yeah. Not to mention funding, increasing funding for ICE and DHS and giving all these authoritarian
they aren't
powers.
really they didn't have a choice. That was just going to happen no matter what.
My argument is I appreciate your not wanting to give an out to these people. My argument is the failure was not that they were bad liberals. Their individual failure was to be liberals in the first place. There is an off-road to this, but it is not through any form of liberalism. No matter how principled, no matter how ecstatic it is for centrism and constitutionalism.
But if you find yourself in a position of elected official position and you're a liberal and the genocide's going on, you could just fucking quit your job.
Yeah. Well, that is to say to stop
an off-road.
To stop being a liberal and start being something else, which is to recognize that your participation is not actually helping anything. There is an off-road to this. The off-road is you cannot have a commodity market. That's the only off-road. As long as you are dedicated to the idea that companies take raw materials, oppress their workers, and end up with a commodity at the end that they can sell for profit. If you're dedicated to that being a social form, then this is inevitable, because that is the fundamental problem here. So there is an off-road. I agree with that. None of this is inevitable, but it's inevitable if liberals lead the fight against it, because they will maintain that core problem, and that core problem is going to continue to get worse, and there's nothing liberalism has that has any chance of fixing that problem. So their moral failing was to continue to try and engage in this deceptive type of oppression, which opens the door for a less deceptive, more violent type of oppression.
I do agree. I do agree. And just want to give our listeners some imagination and hope that like it's not like we're on the runaway train and that's
No,
it.
we're definitely not. But if you want to be off this train, you have to really you have to educate yourself about the fundamental problem that's driving this, to not sort of reduce it down to a political disagreement.
Yes. And maybe actually one of the ways we can go through this article is because he's now going to list characteristics of fascism.
He is.
As one does, like, 'cause that's really intellectually stimulating. But like, there are people behind these things that are happening.
Yeah.
And fascists.
Apparently it's Epstein who's behind it all.
Yeah. Boy, he really, I saw a clip of him like, "Are you the devil?" And he was like, "I could very well be." Like, I think, yes.
I think he might. Yeah.
And he knew it. So, but this is still people making these choices. And fascists can be resisted. And there's a long history of people resisting fascism.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe as we go through the characteristics, we can find those moments to highlight those things.
I agree with you. All right. So back to this guy. When the facts change, I change my mind.
Good for him.
Recent events have brought Trump's governing style into sharper focus.
So the facts didn't change, but
the recent events have put what was always there into sharper focus. I mean, this is one of my gripes with this is, what the fuck is different? You saying the facts changed and so you changed your mind? None of this is different than it ever was.
I think everyone got the memo when we had white bodies being gunned down in the streets. The zeitgeist amongst the liberal magazines, the influencers who were kind of in the middle was, shit, something's changed. But you're right. What has changed?
Yeah, we can deal with George Floyd being killed because that's supposed to happen. But you have like a mom dropping off her kids at daycare. That's a problem. And that's why people are really mad when you say this wasn't fascism until it happened to me.
Suddenly we're going to call it fascism, which is not a helpful political analysis or organizing strategy.
No.
So.
Yeah. And I can see why, it's not wrong to say that, yes, when fascistic stuff happens to more people, it actually changes from evil liberal democracy to evil fascism, or worse fascism, and maybe.
This gets into the dual state thing, which he will reference. But the dual state is a very interesting book written by a Jewish labor lawyer, who saw the rise of Hitler in Germany. He got out before he was killed. He ended up at American University, wrote this book. But what he talks about is that there was a normative state and a prerogative state, and the prerogative state is sort of what you expect from fascism, or what you expect from like Nazism. Like, it's lawlessness, it's violent, it's arbitrary. They can get away with anything. Hitler says, "I want you dead, you're dead." And but the normative state was like all the laws of Weimar Germany stayed the same. Like, courts continued to operate. People continued to like go shopping and bring their kids to school. And it was very quote unquote normal. And these things existed at the same time. And what could be shifting, or what could be coming into sharper relief for people, is we've always had the normative state, and we've had some version of the prerogative state for quite a while. But the ability for the prerogative state to suddenly impact you,
mm-hmm.
the number of people it could suddenly impact has increased.
Right.
So there's always been this sort of fascistic, violent, lawless version of control in the United States. And it's certainly ICE has been a very good example of that for across administrations. But now the prerogative state is shutting down schools in Minneapolis, making it impossible for carpool to happen the normal way.
Mm.
Like, so I think that the prerogative state's like proximity to quote unquote normal Americans got closer.
Yeah.
And I think that's caused this concern.
Yeah. And that is a sign that like we're moving towards a more full-blown fascism.
So maybe we agree with that.
Yeah. All right. All right. So yeah, blah, blah, blah. Recent events have brought Trump's governing style into sharper focus. Fascist best describes it, and reluctance to use the term has now become perverse. That is not because of any one or two things he and his administration have done, but because of the totality. Fascism is not a territory with clearly marked boundaries, but a constellation of characteristics. When you view the stars together, the constellation plainly appears.
So I don't think this is like completely wrong. I do think it's like a progression. And I think that the dual state is an interesting way of looking at that. I think as a Marxist, there is a clear definition of like why it happens and how it happens.
Yeah.
And those characteristics are secondary. However, I do think there becomes like a tipping point moment where it's like, we are now this versus that.
It's a quantity. He's trying to do quantity and quality. The problem with this, though, is that liberals are obsessed with taxonomy, which is categorizing things, and they usually categorize things by their form and not their essence. And that's what he's attempting to do here. And we've mentioned this before, is like, I know it's a wolf. Why? Because I have an ideal in my mind of what a wolf is. Then I compare the thing in front of me, the characteristics of the thing in front of me, to this ideal in my mind of what a wolf is. And then I can label it. Right. Wolf, not wolf. Marxists are not interested in an imaginary ideal and comparing things to it in order to categorize. What we're trying to do is say, look at the entire population of wolves. If I observe these things, I can describe them in practice, and I can understand over time how those things came to exist, how they will come to cease to exist, etc. So Marxists view things as a process with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and how like the internal contradictions and how the internal processes cause those things to become, then studies what they look like, and then studies how they go away.
Right.
So you can see that very plainly in this attempt to like, here's a constellation, right? A constellation does not move, right? So a fascism is a inert ideal, right? And he says this at the beginning of the essay of it doesn't match classic definition, right? What he's talking about is this liberal idea of what fascism is in its purest form, and then compares things in reality to this purest form.
Well, it's just funny because in this case, you don't even get a pure form because there's not even agreement. Like classical, European definitions of fascism from World War II do not even align with each other.
Right.
And this is why you end up with, this is why liberals make such bad arguments. But like it's got a million holes.
Yeah. And like he's perplexed by the differences in fascism in Japan and Germany and Italy and Spain, because he's trying to do this taxonomy approach.
Yeah.
Marxists who understand the essence of fascism as based in the economy and as a process from normal capitalist functioning to capitalism in crisis have no problem with different flavors and forms of fascism appearing in different contexts because they always sitting it into a historical context. So it's not even a blip on my radar to think, oh yes, of course it would be different in different contexts. Right. That we take for granted.
Right. And it's also why you get, I mean, this is the difference between idealism and materialism, but so if you've got an ideal for what a wolf looks like in your head, and a wolf has 4 legs, and then you end up with a thing that doesn't have 3 legs, but it's obviously a wolf, you have to explain to yourself why you have this difference. There's an elaborate need to explain the difference, even though the difference is not at all important to it being a wolf.
Right, exactly.
And everyone can plainly see it's not an important difference. And I think that a lot of liberal political theory really struggles with this, and why when you get into more radical, either Marxist or feminist or critical race theories, their ability to handle meaningful differences versus not meaningful differences, like diversity of experience and perspective, is completely different than like a liberal's argument. And it's another one where it's the argument itself creates all of its own flaws and holes immediately,
right? And
is not like a natural human way of thinking.
All right, so here's his list. I'm not going to read all of these. I'm going to read the title of them, and then we'll go into detail for some of them because they're funny. So there's 2 questions I have. One is, what is different? 2 is, tell me which of these does not apply to Israel. Because I'm guarantee you this guy would not say Israel's fascist.
Tell me which of these don't apply to Jim Crow.
Well, okay, we can do that too. Demolition of norms. From the beginning of his first presidential run in 2015, Trump deliberately crashed through every boundary of civility. He mocked Senator John McCain's war heroism, mocked fellow candidate Carly Fiorina's on his face, seemingly mocked the Fox News host Megyn Kelly's menstruation. Boy, she seemed to have forgotten that real quick. Slurred immigrants and much more. Today, he still does it. Recently making an obscene gesture at a factory worker, he gave him the middle finger, bringing up Epstein, and calling a journalist piggy.
So it's so weird though that like the boundary pushing, the norms that he's identified here are civility. Like that's the primary American political norm.
Yeah.
Which I thought it's not.
Yeah, there's been a lot of nastiness across politics for a long time.
And in fact, there's been a lot of political violence in the United States for a long time. And like, is that a norm? Like, it's just, to me, this reeks of like bullshit. But yeah, you know, the guy's in your face and he is obnoxious. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, you have to admit that there's a quality to him which is less respectful of like the
decorum,
the bourgeois virtues that David Brooks is so infatuated with.
The facade, the political facade. I agree.
Yeah, and that's where the deception starts to go away, and you get more of the authoritarian forcedness. But again, since he's been doing this since 2015. He writes it here. So this has not changed. This has been who he is the whole time. And I think this distinguishes Jim Crow from Netanyahu and Trump, which is Jim Crow was not a departure from norms. In fact, it was a lessening of worse norms for slavery. But Netanyahu and Trump have both overseen the breakdown of like sacred cows, liberal sacred cows. You weren't supposed to do whatever you wanted as long as you maintain this appearance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving on. Glorification of violence.
That's an American tradition.
Yeah. So, yeah, this one's tough. Every state uses violence to enforce its laws, but liberal states use it reluctantly, whereas fascism embraces and flaunts it.
I completely agree with the second part. Fascism does embrace and flaunt it.
Mm-hmm.
Liberals also use it very often, not reluctantly. They just use it with, with deception and behind closed doors.
Yeah, I would update this to say, I think he's right, but he should have said they use it reluctantly as an affectation or as like an optical.
Yeah, they feign reluctance.
That's right.
Yes.
And that I think is important. Is Obama has to stay. He doesn't want to be in Afghanistan. He doesn't want to be in Iraq, but he has to now because he's been entrapped by it. And like it's the best of a bunch of bad options.
He doesn't want to call in a bunch of illegal kills to people's apartment buildings and take out whole families. But it's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's a dangerous world, and
it is.
They started this thing and handed it.
Liberalism is highly violent.
Yeah,
American neoliberalism is extremely violent.
Right,
at home and abroad.
Yeah. And we have to have police, but we want them to be well trained. We want them to use violence as a last resort. We'll make a deal with you, where we'll tell you that it's not something that we want to do, but it's something that we need to do, and therefore you can feel like good about supporting these policies because you're not celebrating violence.
Yeah.
And the difference is fascism wants you to celebrate.
They celebrate violence.
They want you to do it because you can, not because you have to.
That is definitely true.
Okay. Also, so this is Israel, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Is there any difference between this and Trump? One interesting thing about Trump is that they have won a lot of workers over by pretending to be anti-war and wanting to stop doing forever wars and stop being so bellicose.
But not because they're anti-violence.
Right. Only because these were a waste of money.
They're pro-American.
Yeah. Might is right. Also,
this might is right. We are definitely seeing that be a cornerstone of the Trumpian foreign and domestic policy.
Yeah.
And that is a new formation.
Yeah.
Like speaking of it that way, it's a new formulation.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. I also think that the United States was the world police not because we ought to be because we're the strongest, but because no one else could do it. Someone had to do it, and so we were willing to step up to the.
Say.
Yeah, that's what they said before. Now we should have oil in Venezuela because we have strong enough to take it. Mm-hmm. I would say on the parallels to Israel, they continue to make a ploy to American audiences, a liberal ploy to American audiences about the necessity of violence.
But not to their internal audience.
Not to their internal audience, and to their internal audience for years now. They've been saying nations come, nations go, because they're either strong or weak. And we are strong, and we need to be strong if we're going to survive, and we should do what we can, whatever we can take, whatever we can get. That's the national project. They've been very explicitly clear about that in the Israeli press, Netanyahu's speeches to his own people. This is the characteristic. So, politicized law enforcement. Liberals follow the law whether they like it or not. Fascists only when they like it. Nazism featured a, quote, dual state, where at any moment the protections of ordinary law could cease to apply. Trump makes no secret of despising due process of law. He has demanded countless times that his opponents be jailed, lock her up chants, with his endorsement, were a prominent feature of his 2016 campaign. And he has suggested the Constitution's, quote, termination, and said, quote, I don't know, when asked if he is required to uphold it.
It is absolutely a characteristic of fascism to politicize law enforcement and to sort of create this dual state where there's laws, but then at any time those laws don't matter.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I agree with liberals follow the law whether they like it or not. I think that the law has long been politicized and used to some people's advantage and to other people's disadvantage.
Yeah, certainly.
I think liberals have an ideal that they tout about law, constitutional law, rules and order.
Yeah.
But it's not in practice, we don't see it.
Yeah, this is another one where I think he's right, except what he should have said was they feign that they have to follow it whether they like it or not.
Yeah.
So the public, they want to hide corruption. They want to hide when their buddies get a good deal. They don't want that to be, and then they'll make speeches about how we should not have double standards and everyone should be
And
held
some of
equal.
them might have those principles for real, but that's just not how it actually works in practice.
No, but the essential thing here is it's a deception.
Yeah.
The deception is the law applies equally to everyone, and that you can trust us that we're going to do that as much as we're capable of doing, given the alignment of powers or whatever.
Yeah.
Fascists are going to tell you illegal immigrants do not get due process of law. That's illegal according to the Constitution. It's illegal according to most of our laws. But the base and the leader are going to say it anyway, and that they're going to act on it anyway.
Yeah.
So you can't, so all of a sudden you can't get a lawyer. Now, if the lawyer was going to fuck you, the immigration judge was going to fuck you, but there was a process, right, that made this all okay.
Right.
What makes it okay now is these are an internal enemy, and it doesn't matter what we do to them because they're not citizens and therefore they're subhuman.
Yeah. And I do think that the personal retribution that Trump has enacted on individuals, like that's different from Trump 1 to Trump 2.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that according to this guy, 470 people, organizations, and institutions have been targeted for retribution since Trump took office, which is more than one a day. And that includes, the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell.
Yep.
So there is also this cult of personality where who Trump has an issue with is going to get illegally treated without legal basis, which is certainly the characteristic of an authoritarian. But
yeah, I mean, the Justice Department is more politicized than it ever has been. I think most people recognize that.
Pam Bondi saying that Minnesota has to turn over their voter rolls. That's a good example, right?
Right. I think there's a subplot here, which is the Biden administration's inept prosecution of these people, and then more explicitly, Obama's failure to prosecute people during the Bush years. The reason they did that was not because they believe in the rule of law. And the reason they did not do that is not because they didn't want to politicize law enforcement. The reason they did that is that maintaining the appearance of the universality of the law and the appearance of an unpolitical Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice is always reported to the president. That's not changed. Right. He appoints the Attorney General. The Attorney General answers to him. They're supposed to say that this independent and she doesn't ask me or he doesn't ask me my opinion. The Attorney General does what they think they're supposed to do.
So they didn't want to prosecute obvious criminals because they thought it would appear political?
Right, because it would break down this assumption that that law enforcement is not political, and that maintaining that public fiction was much more important than putting people like Cheney in jail, and then later on putting Trump and his people in jail for obvious criminality.
Why didn't we prosecute and have accountability measures to Confederates after the Civil War? Why were they immediately allowed to get back into power, keep their land, keep their political positions?
Because I think they had power. They had power that was beyond political power, and that they used that power. Also, I think
it was not an ideal about legality and accountability in the United States. It was just these white folks with land and money still have enough power to maintain their political.
Yeah, I think also the people who took over after Abraham Lincoln was killed were ideologically opposed to. I think they saw black people as still subhuman. They just objected to slavery, and they found it morally objectionable to
punish white people,
or particularly very wealthy landowning white people. But
I can make them much less wealthy by taking their land.
Well, yeah, but I think that's secondary to there was power that had to resolve itself to this new situation, and that everyone puts their stick on the table. I guess you said compare sticks. And
I was thinking sticks are kind of like dicks, like a dick measuring contest.
Yeah, something like that. So there's power is material.
I'm asking this. This is maybe a total derail, but has there ever been legally extracted accountability for political power brokers in the United States ever?
JFK.
I think they murdered.
Yeah, that was extra.
That was
extrajudicial. No, I don't think so. I mean, Nixon,
Martin Luther King, extrajudicial. Malcolm. We clearly use political violence to extract accountability.
The biggest point of breakage in ruling class cohesion was probably Nixon. Nixon resigned and then was pardoned. That was it, right? I don't know. I mean, I can't, Iran-Contra, some people went to jail for, but not the most important people. I can't think of a time when that happened.
I mean, even through a civil war. I mean, that's
Even
kind
through
of
a civil
mind blowing,
war.
right?
Yeah, even through a civil war, even through like the end of the revolution, we saw some of that, but like George Washington protected a lot of his British loyalist friends.
That's like a lot of coherence.
It's a lot of coherence.
For what? For this project? I mean, it is kind of fascinating.
It is fascinating. And, some part of it is like you lost the game, gentleman's handshake. We're still buddies. You lost this particular round. They're still friends at the end of the day, and they have much more in common with each other than they have with you. Even if you agreed with them.
I mean, certainly they have more in common with each other than they had with the freed slaves.
Yeah.
That's who really lost.
Yeah. But also, and the Union soldiers,
that's
too.
Who he lost. The people who lost and won the game, it was on the backs of those people. But I guess you're right. It's a gentleman's agreement.
Yeah. I mean, look at how George Washington treated the revolutionary soldiers after the war was done. I mean, they went around the currency was a disaster, their pay was a disaster. They put down all kinds of rent strikes and things like that because you fought for us. You are the raw material of our victory. You are not part of this project. We are in control of it. The funny thing about Biden, though, is that he did this thing where they very unwillingly dragged their feet to do some sort of prosecution, trying to, as best as they could, to separate the politics of it from the criminality.
Yeah.
And they failed to, fire the killing shot on him. All they did was pile up a bunch of charges and convict him of things that made him look bad in a way that was looked very political, but failed to actually hold him accountable. Because probably they were afraid of, one, what the reaction from his base would be, and two, because they really didn't want politicized law enforcement. But now, all of that is now the justification for weaponizing, what's the term he uses, weaponizing war, lawfare. This is the term they use, lawfare, where they go after their political opponents. They feel every justification in doing this because that's what they always wanted, but they get to blame Biden for opening the floodgates on this. So, dehumanization.
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, certainly, dehumanization is a characteristic that's required for the lead up of any genocide or extermination project.
Yep.
I'm not sure that, and clearly, if you have a macroeconomic problem of the size that we do, or that you had in Germany pre-World War II, a project that kills a lot of workers is very useful.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if the dehumanization is fascism or the fascism requires dehumanization in order to do ethnic cleansing. We have an enormous amount of dehumanization happening from political leaders, and I think it is in order to clear the way for ethnic cleansing and genocide.
Yeah. I will say that, one, absolutely, this is the case in Israel. It shouldn't even be controversial for Zionist defenders of Israel. The other thing is that this is why Hillary Clinton's comments on black people as super criminals continues to weigh so heavily in the consciousness, because that was an explicit attempt to politically dehumanize people for political gain.
Yep.
And people remember it. So this is...
And
she didn't call people vermin and garbage.
Well, so the particular rhetoric of Trump, too, it's been around since Trump won, but the particular rhetoric of MAGA is deliberately callbacks to Nazism.
Yeah.
Because the base likes it.
Yeah.
So there's is this fascism or is it fascism? It's fascism. And they're using
fascism cosplay.
They're using fascism, fascist callbacks to a time that parts of the MAGA base fetishize.
Yeah.
So when they say vermin or poisoning the blood of our country, it sounds like Nazism because that's on purpose.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
People get off on it.
Yeah. And also, again, this has been around from the beginning.
Oh yeah, I remember during his campaign, the first campaign, watching him at some debate or rally in 2015 and being blown away by how he was talking about immigrants. It was so dehumanizing.
Yeah.
So that's not a new thing at all.
Not at all. And he started his political his serious political campaign by calling immigrants rapists and murderers.
Right. And if you go back and watch Homan from 10 years ago too, you get that kind of rhetoric. So it's
that's been around
for forever.
Police state tactic.
Police state tactics.
Police state tactics.
So having a private paramilitary run by the dictator.
Yeah. So we've had this,
also known as Gestapo.
Right. We've had this in the form of the way that they rearranged the military. The special forces have become less of a military appendage that is governed by Congress and more of a they directly answer to the president or like the president's direct generals. So, but that was focused outwards, right? So you have police state tactics. They were very centralized in the executive, but outwards.
Traditionally.
And they did all kinds of crazy stuff, like running drugs and killing people actually for political reasons, all kind of stuff, but focused outwards. Now we have ICE, which is almost exactly the same thing, a federal paramilitary that answers to the directly to the executive, but now it's facing inward. So this is the imperial boomerang.
And this has been a long game since 9/11. The creation of ICE and these appendages of DHS and how they've been governed and who they are accountable to began with 9/11.
Yeah.
So yes, Trump I think is taking full advantage of it. I think he has a the Proud Boy like pipeline right into ICE. Obviously, they're choosing to literally occupy cities with these bozos, and they are clearly using them as like enforcers against political adversaries, right? Like they're going into blue states to the red states. But this is the result of multiple administrations setting this up as such. So are we saying like Bush, Obama, Biden that they were all preparing for this fascist police state, or what are we saying here?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was at Occupy, I feel like what we encountered was police state tactics.
Oh, well, that's the other thing. I mean, you talk about the way the policing have been militarized, which is a direct tie to Israel because we get our training from Israel. The IDF trains our city police forces.
Yeah, and they get our military hardware for use as policing.
So it's been kind of true for a long time.
Yeah, and so you have the police state tactics building up from 9/11 through Occupy. You had Trump 1, who had this George Floyd. You had a police riot through the George Floyd protests, including federal agents dragging people they had black SUVs with unmasked federal agents not wearing any kind of identifying badge.
Picking activists up.
Yeah, dragging them off the street into vans. And then you had Biden putting down the protests against the genocide in Gaza, using exactly the same tactics, probably an escalation from what Trump did. To now you get to ICE.
Right, and you had the Biden administration partnering just as closely on outing activist students, on partnering probably with Israeli intelligence and privately funded nonprofits, supposedly, that were telling the Biden administration which activists to monitor and harass. But like if we even go a longer view here, you had police riots in cities during Jim Crow and the civil rights movement too.
Yes.
And if you go even longer, I don't know if it's a police state tactic, but what's a slave patrol?
Yeah.
So
this one falls flat to me because this seems like they've always used police state tactics whenever they've needed to.
I think it's a paramilitary force at Trump's beck and call. I think feels concerning because it feels like it's like Trump's Gestapo. ICE is Trump's Gestapo. There's like a feeling of that more than I like this. I understand why people are pulling that up as a fascistic concern.
Yeah.
I just don't. It might be just like it's just very American. It might be that police violence is just not very exceptional, and if anything, you've just seen it continue to get funding, continue to get military grade equipment, continue to use cutting edge technology and surveillance. Like this is just the natural result of policing in the United States
because they anticipate having to use it more and more and more in order to keep things functioning. That's the reason, and not because they like it, but because they can no longer get people to get on board with the laws, so now they need the force.
And there's a huge industry that knows that they need it. They need it here. They need it in Israel. They need it in the periphery, and they're going to build, flashbangs and non-lethal rounds and crazy tank-like things that go through cities and every piece of surveillance tech too. I mean, like a huge industries. People making massive amounts of money to build this stuff and equip these police forces.
Yes. And if you don't believe this exists in Israel, look up videos of Hasidic Jews in Israel protesting the genocide and see what the state police do.
Or look what they do to olive fields.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to make, I don't consider them to be exterior to Israel body politic because they're governed by Israel. But you can make the argument that those are like the subalterns that are always like but even Jews,
no, I know,
if they don't get on board, are subject to state violence in Israel as state policy.
The connection around tactics and equipment and training is extremely obvious. If you just like Google
undermining elections.
Yeah, I mean, Trump doesn't love the idea that he might not get a third term. That's true.
Trump has maintained from the very beginning that he refuses to answer whether he'll accept the results of election he loses.
Right, that's not.
There's nothing new about this.
No. Moving on.
Yeah. Also, there is one time in modern U.S. history where an election was stolen. That was by George Bush Jr. What's private is public. This one's interesting. Classical fascism rejects the fundamental liberal distinction between the government and the private sector. Per Mussolini's dictum, no individuals or groups outside the state. Among Trump's most audacious, if only intermittently successful, initiatives are his efforts to commandeer private entities, including law firms, universities, and corporations.
I mean, I think this one's like particular to Italian fascism. I mean, I guess this was true in Nazi Germany too, but like this is one of the ones where it's like fascism does this differently in different times and places.
Yeah.
I do think that the tightening of relationships between certain private elite, like Musk or Thiel or the Palantir guy, and the state is a symptom of like fortressing the capitalists creating fortress amongst the most super elite in order to protect themselves.
Yeah. And also to discipline parts of the ruling class that are outside of the clique.
Right.
You have the state is no longer governing the ruling class as a whole, but increasingly represents the interests of one clique over another. And so what you see is the state becoming much more involved in settling the disputes between parts of those.
So, but like there's that level of discipline of capitalist interests and capitalists happens all the time in China. So are we to say, does that mean China is displaying fascism because there's like the disciplining of capitalists by the state, or the state taking over industries, or like Venezuela, they nationalized the oil industry. Does that make that fascism? Like, it's just, I mean, some people would be like, of course they'd say yes, because they confuse any sort of leftist state control with fascism, and they are not the same. But like, this is not a useful to me, this is not a useful characteristic unless you're talking about why it's happening.
Right. That's right. I was going to say the answer to those questions about Cuba and China and the Soviet Union even, or what is the class character of it? The class character of fascism is the ruling capitalist elite using the state, merging with the state to oppress their rivals in the ruling class and the working class. The argument, the Chinese apologist argument, is that the class character of the state in China is one that represents the interests of the working class, reining in the excesses of the capitalist class that's tolerated but not in power. I think that that's a very dubious claim. And I think that if you wanted to make the argument that there's a form of fascism in operation in China, there's probably an argument to be made there.
I think it's just a state capitalist project. But
right, which is maybe that's the same thing as a fascist project.
Some people would say it is.
But so I think that this is there's a truth to this, or is a consequence of more important things about fascism.
Yeah, I don't think state capitalism is necessarily fascism, because I think fascism requires a certain level of collapsing capitalist control.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
So if it's a functioning state capitalist situation, I don't think it's fascism.
Which is why I think most people look at China and say that it's not a liberal society, but it's a functioning capitalist society. That's
it's like an anti-liberal state capitalist society.
Okay.
Heard it here first.
Next is territorial and military aggression.
Sure.
So this is one of the reasons he held out. This was the one that pushed it over the edge for him. All the other ones,
Venezuela and Greenland.
Yeah, that's what pushed it over the edge. Probably more Greenland than Venezuela. I mean,
he should have read their state security strategy, because it was this from the beginning.
Yeah, but saying it, I guess was too.
Well, it was sort of saying it's actually saying we were going to be isolationist unless we wanted to claim territory in our hemisphere, I guess.
Well, they didn't want to tangle us, but they were going to do what they had to do in their own hemisphere, certainly, and in all of their other vital interests. So, obviously, territorial and military aggression is the history of U.S. foreign policy. So, I don't know why this feels worse for him than Iraq did. I mean, what they did in Venezuela is objectively less evil, depraved, and fascist than what Bush did.
Yeah, I mean, isn't territorial and military aggression like what imperialism requires?
Yes.
So, and what colonialism like this is not new. I guess you could say it is a fascist characteristic I guess that's all he's saying. I mean, he's just saying, I got enough stars in my constellation.
Yeah.
The bingo card is full.
Yeah. And this wasn't true. This was not true of him. It had been true of U.S. history from the get-go, but not true
Trump.
but not true of Trump until now. So,
I mean, there is contempt for international law and the sort of, the undermining of international, the rules of it.
I mean, I guess, but like Bush, they realized they weren't going to win the UN vote, so they withdrew and just did like this coalition of the willing instead of the UN thing.
Not the best argument.
I don't know. And then on the Israel front, it's laughable to even. I mean, forget just Gaza and the West Bank territorial aggression, but Lebanon, Syria. I mean, they've recently taken more territory in Syria, so it's not even worth talking about. Transnational reach.
What does this mean?
What does this mean? Like authoritarians generally, fascists love company. The world is safer for them if there are more of them. In his second term, Trump has broken with longstanding U.S. policy by dialing back support for human rights while praising and supporting authoritarian populists and illiberal nationalists in Serbia, Poland, Hungary, Germany, Turkey, El Salvador, Slovakia, blah, blah.
I mean, so sure, but like he's on the outs with India. I think Trump likes a strong man because Trump likes a strong man. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
He's a bit of a daddy, likes the daddies. I don't know.
He does.
Fascists love companies, so does most people. I don't like.
I mean, these things happen in waves, and they tend to support each other until they don't. That's all true. So
right, but we've spoken about this before, that a fascist does not necessarily get along with another fascist.
No.
And I don't know. I feels like this is this argument feels pretty.
Yeah, that one feels
pretty empty.
Superficial.
I mean, there is a wave of these postmodern fascists, like post 2010 fascists, Bolsonaro, Modi in India, but like they're not all friends with Trump right now. So I don't. Yeah, try harder, Jonathan.
Blood and soil nationalism.
Sure, 100%.
100%. A fascist trademark is its insistence that the country is not just a collection of individuals, but a people, a Volk, a mystically defined and ethnically pure group bound together by shared blood, culture, and destiny. In keeping with that idea, Trump has repudiated birthright citizenship and advanced his call to, quote, redefine the meaning of American citizenship in the 21st century, so that priority goes to Americans with longer historical ties, quote, the people whose ancestors fought in the Civil War, as he put it, or people whom others on the MAGA right call, quote, heritage Americans. Ew. In other words, some Americans are more Volkish than others.
So this is obviously a very concerning characteristic that is we are seeing it, and it's very similar to the one up here called dehumanization. My take is the same. Like this blood and soil nationalism is a very useful way to get your white man workers and laborers feeling anxious, and also like create the problem and the solution. Become anxious about their position in society, give them a solution that is white nationalism. And you need this kind of nationalism in order to create a other that you dehumanize and then exterminate, especially if you're dealing with overproduction and a problem of too many workers.
Yeah.
So like yes, it's disgusting. It's Nazi-esque in its rhetoric, and it's a deliberate way to create an underclass. Or to not just the underclass exists, but to like really exploit and or exterminate the underclass.
Yep. I think this is a tricky one for me because I agree that blood and soil nationalism has been a key feature of fascist projects until this point. The United States is decidedly awkward for this type of fascist project.
Because we're a melting pot.
We are. And that literally is true. Like in Germany, the target of the racial animus was Jews, who were less than 2% of the population.
Right. They were very homogeneous to begin with.
Yes. I mean, Japan,
yep,
Spain, Italy, their main conflict was people on the left, not with like racial others or immigrants.
No, that they used, but that's the thing. It's a tactic. It's a framing that doesn't actually require a problem. Mm-hmm. It just creates a sense of belonging.
Right. But the problem is that the sense of belonging is supposed to encompass all the people you need to work and fight in the war. Yeah. In the United States, that's extremely awkward because you cannot imagine the United States putting forth a strong military that does not rely on Latinos and Blacks.
Well, that's why it's so interesting that they are going to they're targeting immigrants, because the making of the enemy or the impurity based on their immigration status or their proximity to recent immigration gives you this like very fuzzy line where people can convince themselves that they're the good immigrants, either because their proximity to immigration is several generations back or because they did it the right way.
Right.
They can convince themselves that their skin color is not white, but they get to remain in the in-group that is sort of aligned with whiteness. And then what we're seeing now is they're really demonizing Haitian and Somalian immigrants. So they're choosing immigrants that are specifically very dark-skinned and Black and more other than the Latino immigrants. So they're creating all of these. There's a lot of trickery happening to try to keep their in-group of mostly men feeling like they're
still a part of
they're
it,
still
even if
part
they're
of
not
it.
quite.
And that's the thing with fascists, though. Like, you can be part of it one day and not the other day. That's also the same with the dual state. You can feel protected one day and not be protected at all the next day. So it's, it's not a deal I would make.
Yeah. I mean, I would be curious to hear J.D. Vance talk about whether Black slaves who fought in the Civil War, whether their descendants are, quote, heritage Americans. I think that would be...
Heritage Americans is a sick term. I have not heard that before.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear whether the movement had a high tolerance for inclusion of Black people or whether they had a low tolerance and he had to sort of dance around it. But...
What about indigenous people? Because they have blood and soil.
Yeah, this reminds me of the Christmas Club where like, oh, he's not a native born, he's just a Native American. He's not a Native American.
Yeah.
I think in the United States context, what we will necessarily see is something much more of a multicultural sort of fascism. There's a
multicultural fascism.
Yeah,
I feel like we need a poster set.
Yeah. If you have seen Starship Troopers, the movie that began its life as a silly teenage sci-fi romp that later took on the esteem of having done something of a fascist satire of the United States. That portrays what I think is a very interesting form of fascism, which is many of the features of fascism, and in particular, like the militarism and obsession with militarism, but does so in a way that is agnostic about both race and gender. And it is obsessed with citizenship, but it is not obsessed with citizenship as defined by race and gender. And I think that is why I think that the liberals of today could potentially be much more effective fascist leaders of tomorrow, because they're much more likely to be able to pull off the multicultural type of fascism required to make poor Black people, poor Latino people believe that fighting for their country and dying in China, in a war in China, is them being part of a national project as opposed to being just like an oppressed underclass that's being pushed to the front line.
I mean, I think this is one where the ideology and the belief systems are not internally consistent. They probably are different across like thinkers in the administration, and they're probably trying to figure out what is most effective, because you could have fascism that's trying to deal with a crisis in capitalism, that's choosing to do it, I guess, multiculturally, as long as there's other systems of hierarchy and control and people coercion and control that you can pull. Like you can scapegoat LGBTQ people and immigrants and Jews, but you could have like Black and brown and white people all perhaps occupy this like blood and soil American tribe. It doesn't seem like that's what the administration is trying to communicate. It does seem like a real white nationalism shining through.
Yeah,
so
that's
because what they want? Or because they think that, I don't know exactly what the end game here is. I think they're kind of just trying a bunch of different things tactically and cosplaying Nazis a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of ideological stuff floating around in this, which is muddying the waters, because I think some of these people are they have a mental illness, which is white supremacy, and it makes them do stupid things, like alienate their future soldiers, for example.
Right, they're just hyper racist, and that's what drives them most.
Right,
yeah.
Or drives them in addition to other things that are more like advantageous to them to care about, and they can't sort of separate the two.
Well, you also see it with the confusion and incoherence around anti-Semitism, and Trump's got Jews in his family. Stephen Miller is a Jew, and the administration is perfectly happy to both advance anti-Semitic and white supremacist ideas and use anti-Semitism as a cudgel to discipline the left.
Yeah.
And they will do both at the same time until eventually one becomes primary. And I don't usually, the Jewish safety is not the primary for fascists.
But what I'll say is the material here is, can the kind of allegiance and dedication that they require for this only be created by like racial homogeneity or not? So the question is, will a smaller, more homogeneous military perform better than a larger, less racially cohesive military? That's an open question, I think.
Hegseth seems to think that Hegseth's rhetoric around his military seems to be smaller, more homogeneous.
Right. I think that's the right wing. The Trump right wing believes the former, that it doesn't matter the numbers as much as it matters how politically dedicated the people are. And there is an argument to be made that political dedication is much more important than like the size of a military.
And they believe you can get political dedication through tribalism and particularly and this is why I said my two ingredients for fascism: white male workers who are really anxious about their prowess.
But if you had to rely on those people exclusively, like just close your eyes and think back to Vietnam. If you had to rely on those people exclusively, as opposed to the masses of black workers that got massacred in Vietnam, would you think that they would have lasted longer in that war?
No, and I mean, we're not talking about Vietnam. We're probably talking about World War III. So
right, even worse.
But they could be that there's a warfare where you have a military of the Volksian military, and then you have the cannon fodder, who are like run by AI agents. I don't know, it could be
but those people turn around and shoot their officers. That's what they did in Vietnam. That's what they don't want to repeat.
But maybe they have technology to prevent that now.
I mean, they may think they
like this where we get it. Oh, we were supposed to do this where we talk about how this is about people and people could resist this, and we didn't do it.
Yeah.
But that's what you're saying is like this is you need. Why would people sign into this project? And the United States in particular, with the level of diversity that is like required for our economy to run and has always been, who is a Volk? Who's a Volk?
Yeah, that's going to be a central question going forward, I think. White and Christian nationalism.
I thought we covered that.
Yeah, so this is different, though. This is, as opposed to blood and soil nationalism, this is making that, so this is the answering the question. They want the Volk to be white Christians, without being too explicit about it, because that's going to be too difficult. I don't know. I don't know. They're scrubbing our history of racism. That's true. They have signaled they want a wider, more Christian America. That's true. So I don't know. We'll see. Not something that's new for Trump.
Nope.
Not Israel is not white Christian, but they are white Jewish nationalism for sure. And I emphasis on the white because the black Jews do not get the same esteem as white Jews in Israel. Mobs and street thugs. The use of militias and mobs to harass, rough up, and otherwise intimidate opponents is standard fascist stratagem. This is true. They use like non-state actor militias.
Proud Boys.
Yeah.
January 6th folks. This is not new.
This is also not new. It's also extremely pervasive in Israel.
And I think, though, what we have pointed out, and what we pointed out prior, is that there's more popular fascism and less popular fascism, or strong and weak fascism. They don't have that many thugs that want to be on the street and fighting. I mean, January 6th probably was the most they could get together at one time. Yeah. And they did it once.
Yeah. Patriot Front and the One Percenters and the Patriot Boys and the Boogaloo Boys and all these different groups were explicitly created to try and stop large left-wing protest movements, and they've never been able to do that ever. So,
and there haven't been that many to stop. In fairness to,
I agree with that. They were inept in the face of the George Floyd protest. They've been inept in the face of these ICE things. They were, I think, created in the years before Occupy, but they were somewhat more successful for the Gaza thing because they had more support from like the Democrats.
They had more support from like formal apparatus instead of being
right, instead of having to do it on their own. But they've never really been that successful. I think that's important. They were much more successful, for example, in Germany doing this kind of stuff.
Well, that's for sure.
Leader aggrandizement.
Cult of personality.
Yeah. And I love this. Since 2016, when he declared I alone can fix it. Okay, so this has been since the very beginning. Nothing changed.
Always been his symbolism.
Yep.
And his MAGA is built off of this.
Yeah. Alternative facts.
I mean,
also been from the very beginning, alternative facts.
Right. Well, he was talking about Obama not being a citizen from the very beginning. It's just purely made up. He makes stuff up all the time. I mean, there is more of a crisis, I think, of facts and truth in 2026 than there was in 2016, because it's been like a long road, not just from Trump, though. I mean, I think we've got a facts and truth problem that lays at the feet of many politicians, many corporate hacks, the way the internet has been completely demolished by capitalism, the way journalism has been completely destroyed by capitalism. This is not Trump. They do seem to really love anti-fact news.
Yeah.
Just like, and I guess that's all this. You've got Mick Fuentes. You've got this entire cottage industry of people who just make sure you have QAnon, all of that.
Yeah. They seem to get a kick out of repeating things they know is not true and having their entire like mouthpiece internet / news media people all repeat something that's blatantly false
and all the bots
making
too.
making you have to, like, that's an allegiance test, is I will repeat the thing that's obviously not true. So there's something there, I think, but not new.
Nope.
Not new for him. Politics as war.
This one's interesting.
Yeah, I tend to agree with this. The distinctive mark of fascism is the conception of politics, best captured by Carl Schmitt, an early 20th century German political theorist whose doctrines legitimized Nazism. Schmitt rejected the Madisonian view of politics as social negotiation, in which different factions' interests and ideology come to agreement.
Which is actually what Carney talking about the middling powers, trying to figure out how to make agreements, make alliances, have certain things we agree on, certain things we don't agree on, is much more of this Madisonian view of how to do politics. I'm talking about on an international scale.
Yeah.
And that is obviously fully rejected by Trump and this administration, both domestically and internationally.
Yeah. And this is, again, we talked about this already, but this is a function of the developing of a serious rivalry amongst the ruling class, and the need for them to duke it out because there's less and less of a pie to share, and that the differences in their approach to economics and their ideology becomes more and more sharp. So that's what this is, and this is, and also, like, if there was a left contender, which there isn't really in the United States, that the conflict between the state and that left contender would become more extreme, because as society breaks down, the left becomes more dangerous.
Yeah.
But a threat.
And obviously this is a result of a material condition where power and profit needs to be further controlled. So you have, quote, the aim of Schmittian politics is not to share the country, but to dominate or destroy the other side, which is very much like might makes right, which was a previous bullet as well.
Yeah, that's true. I would say that threatening to imprison Hillary Clinton if he won the election was an example of this. So it's been there from, again, the very beginning.
Yeah.
Governing, this one might not be as president in Israel, because there's so much political agreement on exterminating Gaza and expanding the state that it seems hard to imagine that.
I don't know what the internal politics of Israel are well enough to comment.
Yeah, even the, like, Netanyahu's liberal opponents tend to agree with the fascist project. Governing as revolution. Revolution.
This one's interesting.
Although born in revolution, the American liberal tradition, especially its conservative branch, prizes continuity, stability, and an incremental change guided by reason. Fascism, by contrast, quote, is not reactionary but revolutionary, as Mussolini insisted. It seeks to uproot and replace the old order, embraces bold, exhilarating action unshackled to rational deliberation. MAGA praises its own revolutionary ethos. What Russell Vought, the administration's Office of Management and Budget Director, and probably its most formidable intellect, has called, quote, radical constitutionalism, a doctrine that would vitiate many checks on presidential power.
So, I'm confused by that, because a radical constitutionalism seems to me to be a return to constitutionalism, which would be not revolutionary, but in fact, like a return to a former time. I do think that framing this as a revolution or as a radical departure or a big change or a bold move, like that is definitely part of what this administration is doing. And it makes the Democrats in particular look extremely inept because they literally have no new ideas. So even though these ideas are fascist and bad for people, I think it has some appeal. It has a populist appeal partially because it's like, at least you're doing something. And we've talked about how the liberals look because they're like, we can only do what we've only ever done. That's all we've got. So I think there is this like revolutionary element to it.
Yeah, this is why Bannon calls himself a Leninist. It's exactly this threat.
I don't know what radical constitutionalism has to do with it.
What he means here is that there's a bureaucracy which is anti-constitutional, but has been slowly ingratiating itself into society and accepted as normal, even though it's aconstitutional. And his point is, if you follow the letter of the Constitution, you can do a lot more than like current institutions, which are aconstitutional, allow for. And so your authority needs to be vested not in like what has come to be accepted as normal and stable, but what is deemed appropriate by the Constitution, so you can move much more quickly than these aconstitutional.
Which is why they came in and did this whole like shock and awe destruction of all of the bureaucracy, because they were like, we're going to be guided by our fascism and our constitutional, our radical constitutionalism to destroy.
Not letting you tell us what the quote unquote rules are, because you're all in the deep state of decided on a bunch of rules which have nothing really to do with like those. So
I don't know if I'd call that governing as revolution. I'd say what I was saying is more governing as revolution, and what he's saying is more destruction of bureaucracy.
Well, it is revolutionary in the sense that the problem with this is it's backwards. They're not revolutionary because they're fascism. The moment calls for a complete realignment of society of some kind. And the version of that they're going with is fascism. But the revolution is required. All these institutions have to be completely rebuilt in some way or another.
Yeah, and when it's funny because when Mussolini is saying is not reactionary but revolutionary, and that's just propaganda. They're talking what Mussolini did. And what Vout is doing and what Trump is doing is actually is reactionary to the moment. And it's about returning to something. It's about nostalgia. It's about rolling back rights. It's about a lack of progression. In fact, like reshoring is literally like a rewind of our economy.
Right.
We call for a revolution in this moment, but that's not what we're going to get from Mussolini or from Trump.
Yeah. And if you were to
a cultural revolution,
if you got Bernie Sanders, and a serious Bernie Sanders that wanted to shake up the way that things function, I've often said, I mean, I don't know the degree to which he's serious.
Are you saying like Graham Plattner? Are you saying Gondani?
Yeah. If you had one of these people who was serious about it, I've often reflected on the fact that the form it would take would be very similar, which is a war on the bureaucratic state.
Yeah, you'd have to destroy all that stuff very quickly.
Yeah, and the same kind of objections from civil society and media would be leveled against someone like that, because the system prefers homeostasis and would have a really hard time accepting any kind of radical change. Though the type of change is, in this case, we're concerned with the fascist change, but the change itself is necessary, and the reason why most liberals don't like it is that it's change, not because they disagree with the type of change per se.
Well, most liberals don't like it because it's change and they are comfortable. Do you mean like liberal politicians, or do you mean like
I'm talking about liberal politicians, liberal leaders? People who've been tricked by liberalism is a whole separate issue. But I'm talking about the liberal leaders, like the Gavin Newsom administration will not roll this back, because what will be normal and accepted by the time he's in office will be all of this shit, and they will be object only to changing it.
I agree. I was saying if a legit Bernie Sanders came in and rolled all this back for actual socialist program, Gavin Newsom would undo that immediately.
Yes, that's probably true. They tolerated the New Deal for a long time. If you think about it, if they could be convinced that it was compatible with money making,
they would pick what gets stability and market.
It would undermine it over time, but
they would keep the things that create stability and market success.
Yep.
So where do we go from here? I mean, those are all of his characteristics.
All right, so he says one can object that there are elements of classical European fascism that are not found in Trumpism. And he says mass rallies, which is not true. There's been mass rallies. That's been a key feature of the Trump thing from the beginning.
Yeah, he had that one in New York, right before the election. It was like, wow, that was super Nazi heavy.
And the stupid fucking mainstream media has been putting his rallies on broadcasting his rallies since the 2016 election.
Like Lenny Reichstag themselves.
Public rituals. I'm not sure what that.
Oh, that's like, there's not that many public rituals. I think that's like signing oaths and having parades. And I mean, his parade was really sad, but like Hitler had really
They tried to.
Hitler had a great parade.
Besides those two, I can't imagine what he'd be referring to. There's not been a genocide yet, I guess.
There has been, well, I guess not technically a Trumpian genocide.
Yeah. He says, however, this is his light at the end of the tunnel. If, however, Trump is a fascist president, that does not mean that America is a fascist country. The courts, the states, and the media remain independent of him, and his efforts to browbeat them will likely fail. He may lose his grip on Congress in November. He has not succeeded in molding public opinion except against himself. He has outrun the mandate of his voters. His coalition is fracturing, and he has neglected tools that allow presidents to make enduring change. He and his party may defy the Constitution, but they cannot rewrite it, thank goodness.
No, that's just such a stupid take.
It's such a stupid
Because what is true is that a fascist president does not make a fascist country. I'm not a fascist. The people in Minneapolis who are fighting back are not fascists.
Mm-hmm.
There's many of us who are not fascists. In fact, they even wrote a little memorandum to make sure that there's not too many of us so they can just arrest us at any time. However, Congress, the courts, they're just
rolling over.
They're just allowing the fascism.
Yeah,
they've done nothing to stop this.
No.
They are, in fact, by that definition, they are in fact part of the fascism. The people, potentially, maybe the unions, are not.
Only in saying something about molding public opinion has he mentioned the actual safeguard here, which is that masses of people, particularly people living in economically key cities, are not willing to accept it. And he should say that in this. He should say, thank God for the people protesting, putting their lives on the line, because I'm witnessing the courts roll over. I'm witnessing the news media roll over. I'm listening all these civil society organizations roll over. I'm watching all these businesses who said they'd never support this completely roll over for this.
You wonder when he's writing this if he actually is so deluded that he's looking around and saying like, good thing our courts aren't fascist, or if he just knows like what his job is which is to pretend that the real constraining factor on a fascist administration is the Constitution or the Supreme Court.
Well, this is an age-old hobby horse of liberals, is to watch radical grassroots militant organizing achieve something and then give all the credit for those successes to liberal institutionalism.
Yeah.
Right. You have a 8-hour workday and a 5-hour work week. Why? Not because unions illegally struck were attacked and killed by Pinkertons with the support of liberals. It's because the liberals passed the New Deal, right? And this is the same thing as that. It's like all these institutions which have been completely absent from the story, you have them to thank for this. Don't think for a second you have the people who are breaking the law in Minnesota fighting out back against the front lines of fascism.
So just to be clear, like to just get very specific of an example, one of the most dangerous things Donald Trump has done in the second term was on the first day in office, he signed something to deny birthright citizenship to newborn babies. To basically be like, I'm ending birthright citizenship, right? And everyone was like, well, that's going to go to the courts. It'll be fine. It'll go to the courts. So rather than affirm the right to birthright citizenship, which is clearly in the Constitution, the highest court in the land used the case to strip lower courts of their ability to issue nationwide emergency relief in most cases. So instead of halting the fascist, lawless, racist, anti-constitutional action by the president, they just made it easier for him to get away with it in the future, right?
Yeah.
So, and this guy just wrote an entire fucking thing about why things like stripping birthright citizenship would be a fascist move, why it would be anti-constitutional. And then he wants to pretend that the courts are going to save us. And, you know, there was dissenting opinion in the courts. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson actually cited the fucking dual state, the book that everyone goes to about fascism, including this guy who just wrote this fucking piece. So it's like, if I'm giving him the biggest benefit of the doubt, all I can say is he's doing thoughtless, notional writing about things he doesn't understand. But it's not, I don't think he gets the benefit of the doubt. I think he's covering
This is
for the liberal class, the political class who has demonstrated that they will do nothing to stop this, but wants to get back in power to do their version of fascism that just protects their elites.
Yeah.
Versus Trump's elites.
Right.
Who all fucking were on Epstein's Island anyway, so I don't even know why they're infighting.
Yeah, I mean, what he wants to do is say that that you are being protected from this madman by, guess what? The bipartisan neoliberal consensus, which still exists and still is stronger than him and will win the day, right? And, ignore all the actual fighting that's happening. Just put all your faith in people like me, and we'll get back into power, and everything will be fine. And that was a promise that Biden made. He's, I'll get back in power, and this goes away. You'll never have to hear of Trump again. You don't have to worry about this stuff. You can go back to brunch, right? Mm-hmm. And how did that work out? No solutions at all for any of these problems. No analysis of where these problems came from. This is simpleton shit. I mean, to say I wasn't convinced of it before, but I am now. Here's a list of reasons why. And every single one of them was present, not just in his first term, but in his election run. Like, where were you? You weren't paying attention before now?
Yeah.
You weren't following the news? You just decided to turn on the news?
Or you didn't take it seriously?
Yeah.
Like
you thought it was all just bluster?
Yeah.
But it wasn't. I mean, the first term they did this stuff. So,
Right. And then they wrote their plan. The Heritage Foundation wrote the plan for this, and then they started executing it on day one. The Heritage Foundation, he probably rubs shoulders with those assholes when he goes to the fucking think tank conference.
Absolutely.
The Brookings and the Heritage and the blah, blah, blah.
Absolutely.
Anyways, so now that we've gotten all heated.
Intellectual lightweight, a moral coward, perfect for writing for the Atlantic.
And I hope that he really welcomes his new colleague, David Brooks, into the
Another intellectual lightweight and moral coward. All right.
We only have intellectual heavyweights in this family. this house.
It's a burden, really. Okay.
All right, done and dusted.
Done dusted.
As you grow old, your powers will fade. As you grow old, you're on the make, and you don't do regret. You're always out for what you can get. You think like a snake, and you ooze like a snail. Let the trail go cold as you swallow your tail. With your low rent skills and your heart of flint, telling your tales that are unfit to print. You're all weasel words, backed up by the boots, obsessed like the rest, with a promise of loot. Your pies will fade as you grow old. 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 You demanded the sea, it obey your commands. You grab at the land with both of your hands. But candles will burn, and time will reveal all that you've done and the money you steal. The suffering you're causing gives you no pause for thought. You've got your claws in the dead summer's heart. Birds will return, as the birds always do. When they come home to roost, they'll feast on you. Your pies will fade as you grow old. Your pies will fade as you grow old. Your pies will fade as you grow old.